And this is a lot of guilt. And I think this is something that, is hard to talk about, but is very hard to make the choice of whether, one, move your parent out of their home when they can no longer be there, and then two, to not be the person to take care of them, to not become their caretaker.
Shh. Welcome to the Secret Life Podcast. Tell me your secret. I'll tell you mine. Sometimes you have to go through the darkness to reach the light. That's what I did. After 12 years of recovery in sex and love addiction, I finally found my soulmate, myself. Please join me in my novel, Secret Life of a Hollywood Sex and Love Addict, a 4-time bestseller on Amazon. It's a brutal, honest, raw, gnarly ride, but hilarious at the same time. Check it out now on Amazon. Welcome to Secret Life Podcast. I'm Breanne Davis-Gant. Today, I'm pulling back the curtains of all kinds of human secrets. We'll hear about what people are hiding from themselves or others. You know, those deep, dark secrets we probably want to go to our grave with, or those lighter, funnier secrets that are just plain embarrassing. Really the how, what, when, where, and why of it all. Today, my guest is Kat. Now, Kat, I have a question for you. Dun, dun, dun. What is your secret?
I have a sick parent. My biggest secret about it is that I tend to carry around this grief with me all of the time that I think is maybe not visible on my everyday life, but is something that I think I'm constantly coping with.
Interesting. Now, can I ask which parent is sick or what's the illness?
Yeah, my dad has had Alzheimer's for about 8 years, a little longer.
Wow. I haven't ever had anybody in my life have that. Can you explain to us what that's like?
Yeah. Well, like the disease itself or what it's like.
Well, I mean, all of it, like the experience when you found out 8 years ago and he found out that his mind is changing. How has that been like through the process?
Yeah, well, I think this is the case with almost all Alzheimer's patients, but it is a very slow process for the most part, especially if it's not early onset. If it's just general dementia or Alzheimer's, it is sort of a slow going process, and there are medications that can slow it down, which he is on. The way we knew is that he was giving away a lot of money to people. He also...
Wait, what do you mean he was giving away a lot of money?
So I'm from a small town, and somehow some people had realized that he was sick, and they started taking money they started asking him for money, and then they would come multiple times a day. And I mean, just in checks alone, we know he wrote over $8,000 to one person.
No.
Horrifying. Yeah. And it is technically elderly abuse, but we never.
That's definitely elderly abuse. That actually irks me when people go after the elderly. And did so you didn't go after this person?
We did not, because the one thing you have to really think about when you have a parent it was really important for me. And it's something I think about a lot. It was, trying to allow him to keep his dignity. And that's very hard as a person. He was also having he always had hoarder tendencies, and it got really bad. So his house we weren't gone. We had seen him fairly recently, but his house had become like overrun with stuff. Mm-hmm. It was pretty disgusting. In order to prosecute, he would have to go on the stand, and we'd have to prove that he wasn't fit to make that decision. And I was not ready to put him through that.
That makes total sense. And let's go back to the hoarding thing. Is that was he buying stuff and hoarding it, or like getting stuff off the street, or just, there's so many different types of ways people hoard.
Yeah. Any and all of the above, really. I mean, anyone who has had like a hoarder in their life knows that they're the kind of person who, stuff off the street, someone's giving away, a stack of mattresses. They're going to take that into their house, but then also just junk. And who I really hate is junk mail people.
Oh my God, I hate junk mail.
Yeah,
hate it.
Yeah. He also, and this is no fault of these organizations, but was giving a lot of money to organizations, which I think he he did do throughout his whole life, but then he just started giving to anyone who would advertise to him. And whether or not they were real, like nonprofits, et cetera, but some that I don't even think were real. And he gave away a lot of money to those. And there was a lot, they send you a lot of mail. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but if you're giving to 100 of them, that stuff adds up. So it was just you could not see the floor of any room of his house really at that point.
Wow. I mean, seeing your father as, his daughter, how did that feel? Like having no control or power to like fix him, or how did that feel?
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. There is like a lack of power because as a child, you're used to this very traditional, parent-child relationship, right? They're in charge, they make the decisions. And suddenly you have to flip that. The first thing we did was we had to, get in charge of his finances because even though he was still capable of living alone for a while, he was unable, obviously, to take care of his own finances because he wasn't paying bills, but he was instead writing checks to random people who would come to his house these people would show up at his house at like 3 a.m. and ask him.
That makes me so mad. I'm like angry right now. Like I could like punch someone, which is not the answer. People do not do that. But it makes me so angry. So that started happening. Was that the wake up call? Did you go and visit him, or how did you know this was happening?
Well, we're from a small town and the bank called us. The bank, this is how small it is that the bank called us and said, something's going on with your dad. And he's pulling out all this money in the middle of the night. He's writing all these checks. We don't know who they're to. We just thought you should know. So my brother and I flew down there. Here's the thing. I mean, the thing about this disease that's so weird is that people can present as very normal because they can fake it. And my dad is a highly intelligent man. He was a politician for a lot of his life. So he's very good at faking being normal. And so there was a lot of me going through trying to accept whether or not it was real, but it's hard to deny it when the money was what really made us realize that it was happening. But even then it was hard for me to accept it was real. And he never accepted it. Like even we got him, he was diagnosed, he would never accept it.
So to this day, he hasn't accepted it to this day.
Right, exactly. But at this point, he's almost nonverbal. So there's not much, at this point, it doesn't really matter. But no, he's never accepted that he's sick.
Wow. I know this is probably a hard question to answer. And you just said he's nonverbal, but was there a time where you would come and he wouldn't know who you were? Has that happened?
No. So we moved him out to Los Angeles. So I moved him out to Los Angeles, almost 8 years ago. My brother lived with him for a while. We had people living with him for a while, who were helping out, some nurses, et cetera. But eventually we just decided that the care, there are actual memory care facilities here in Los Angeles that I really liked when I toured them. And so we moved him out here so he could be with people who specialized in this kind of thing. And I really think it is actually, it was not a smooth transition, but it's been a smoother decline, I think, because of that, because he can go and work with these people who know how to work with people specifically with Alzheimer's. He goes to class, quote unquote, most days where he learns stuff. It keeps his mind active, which I think is better than where we're from. The facilities I found were just kind of put them in a room and this is a lot of guilt. And I think this is something that, is hard to talk about, but is very hard to make the choice of whether, one, to move your parent out of their home when they can no longer be there, and then two, to not be the person to take care of them, to not become their caretaker. Because my brother was his caretaker for a while, and it proved to be too hard. And it worked better to have not strangers, but people who he would listen to. There's a lot of guilt surrounding that. There's a lot of guilt of why did I not just move him into my house? Why did I not just give up my life and move back home and take care of him? We didn't know how long it would last. It could have been a year. It could have been 6 months, but instead it would have been 8 years of my life. And I just wouldn't. I would come back and have not ways to support myself. You know how the industry is. I work in the industry, and if you left for 8 years, you would not be able to return.
Oh, no. They would be like, who are you? What have you done? Even though you have a resume. But I do have to say, on, that guilt. And I think that's where the secret and not talking about it lies, but you don't have the tools to even take care of him because my father's mother got really ill too. And he struggled the last couple of years taking care of her.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, I wouldn't have the nursing skills that he needs. But for a while, I definitely could have, and I made the choice not to, which is hard. And it definitely, I feel a lot of guilt around that for sure. I mean, when things are going on, when you have a parent that is going through something like this, you're going to be in and out of the hospital just because of the health problems they're going to have. He falls quite a bit and ends up in the hospital. We had problems with a tooth that put him in the hospital for like a month. I mean, like that, just like because of the state of his health and because of his cognition is just not great. There's just like a lot of problems that end up happening. I mean, just like one time off the top of my head, I am an actress and I had an audition and I was literally sitting in the hospital at the time of my audition. And, you know, it's hard to explain to people, you know, you don't want to get into the backstory of it all. And then you're like, well, I'm in the hospital with a loved one and I can't leave him because he doesn't have he can't be left alone in a hospital because he doesn't know where he is. And that's too confusing. And if he tries to get up and whatever. So, I would, you know, miss auditions. I would miss appointments, and also just like trying to pay attention, you know, when you're going through something and you're just trying to pay attention, but you know, there's so much you just can't.
Oh, girl. When I was my like first year of sobriety in my program, I could not go to any auditions. I remember I would get these calls for auditions and so much like trauma and stuff was coming in my brain that I, for a year, did not work. Like I could not literally walk into the room with everything going on outside and internally. So I get it. Like it's hard to function and it's hard to become someone else when you're going through something personally. I don't think people understand that.
That is actually a really good point. That's exactly what it is that if you don't have a good sense of self or something to jump off from, it's going to be very difficult to do something else. And even looking back at my work during that time, I'm like, wow, I'm horrible in this. I don't know. I had a lot on my mind. And I think it's interesting because I definitely had to carry around the grief of, you know, because I lost him as a father a long time ago, but I have him in a different capacity now. But I kind of like grieved that relationship for a long time. But you can't say, well, he didn't die. And like, there's almost like, I wish I could wear an armband that just said like, I'm sorry if I treat you differently. I'm going through a lot right now. You know, like,
no, but that's totally true. That's totally true because I didn't have, but like the relationships with my parents through my change changed and there was a loss. Like there's a death when a relationship molds into a different way or you lose a relationship. And it sounds like it was a death of this past bond that you had. And it's a new one, but it's totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I won't say like our relationship was complicated before. And so like adding this into it makes it even more like.
Oh, wait. Okay. So how was it complicated before? Can you give us just a little bit?
Know, I would say he was not like a dad who's like around. He wasn't a dad who I was like super close to, but we had moments, you know, he was supportive of me. He was I will say he was one of the very few people who supported me moving to Los Angeles and pursuing the film industry, which is interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Very few people who supported me in that, but overall it was a difficult person to get along with, very stubborn. That has lasted through the Alzheimer's.
That's like a characteristic that just stays with you and gets worse through old age.
Yeah, exactly. Like amplifies. And just kind of you know, not a person who was not a warm person, not a very fatherly person, I would say, but you know, he's a human. And I think that's the other thing is that once your parents get sick, you kind of have to start viewing them as people and they're not perfect. And that is a very crazy realization for you as a child. Because you're like, oh, wow, they had the same problems I have now that they were trying to deal with. And like, you know, Southern man of a certain age is going to not be great at having a daughter.
Yeah. But I do want to go back. Did you tell your team that you were going through that? Like if your agent called? Yeah.
My manager at the time knew sort of, and I would let them know if I was like in the hospital or something. I think some of my team knew. I distinctly remember not telling, like I was supposed to go do a job or something. And then I ran. And then I kind of told the person, but not really. And this was when I was moving him out here. I had to move him. And, and I ran into the person later at a party and they were like, how are you? Like giving me that look of like, how are you? Knowing what was going on. And I was like, oh, fine. And I completely played it off like there was nothing happening. And I'm sure the person thought either I was lying to begin with, like that nothing happened with my dad, or I was just like a total freak. I have no idea. But I was just like, I'm not going to get into it right now.
What do you mean? You don't want to talk about it at a party over a glass of champagne or...
Trying to move your dad across country when he doesn't know where he is and keeps trying to jump out of the car the entire time. You don't want to tell that story.
Oh my God, he was trying to jump out of the car?
Well, yeah, because we told him we were going to a Mexican food restaurant and we drove him to California because we had to get him out here somehow because we needed to be able to be close. I mean, now I see him, all of the time, which is fantastic. But we needed him here to move him and we couldn't get him on a plane. We tried. It didn't work.
So you said, Dad, let's go eat some delicious Mexican food. And you put him in the car and just started driving.
Yeah, we're going to the jalapeno tree. And then my brother and I put him in the car and we just started driving. When
did it click like, we're not going to eat chips and salsa?
It would click around then. He has an interesting memory because his sort of like resets and it would reset about every 30 minutes. About every 30 minutes, he would be like, where are we? We're not anywhere close to home. I know what that sign means. And he would start freaking out and panicking and trying to jump out of the car and threatening to call the police and all these things.
Oh my God. How stressful for you and your brother. That had to be like, was that like 30-minute clock coming up and you're like, oh my God, it's going to start again. It's going to start again.
Well, you learn a lot about how to like cope with this kind of stuff. I mean, it was also a 2-day drive. So it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. At some point we were able to convince him he had agreed to the trip, but it took a minute. It took a long time.
Wow. When you're saying that, I'm just thinking, what a loving daughter, because not many children would probably deal with that. They probably would have just kept him in a home close to his place and not had to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, the people from his town or our town were pretty mad that we were taking him. They thought they didn't like it. They thought we should leave him there. But he would be dead. There's no question in my mind that he would not be at the level that he's at now because of the care that he's been able to have. And because we're able to be there, the number of times he's had to be hospitalized and knowing that I could be there is just so different. I couldn't have flown out there every single time. I don't know what we would have done. Like if you're on a job, you can't go.
Yeah, you can't leave.
Yeah, like 2 hours on a really far flight.
Well, my other question for you is, how many people know this about your dad? Now, are you more open about it or you still kind of keep it close to your chest? I'm
a little open. I don't talk about it 100. You wouldn't know it like if you just knew me casually. I do try to talk about it a little bit on social media because I know that it is helpful. I don't know when this comes out. This is going to be relevant regardless, but my dad got COVID. He tested positive for COVID. And that was, I can't even talk about the horrifying day I had because he tested for COVID. They told me he was about to be hospitalized. I packed a bag. I was ready to go to the hospital and I called them and I was like, well, what room is he in? And they were like, you can't come to the hospital during coronavirus. You can't go. So he had to go to the hospital by himself. And I was like, no, that's not how we do it. I go to the hospital. This is what we do. And I can be fairly controlling. And I think that not having that control was like one of the worst moments of my life. I literally lost bodily function. I didn't know what to do. He actually is okay now. He got through it.
Oh, that's great.
He was asymptomatic the entire time. He just tested positive. He tested positive for a couple of weeks and then he was okay. It was very weird, but they took a good care of him at the hospital as well. I'll say that.
When you say you lost control of bodily, how, did you were you shaking? Were you hysterically crying or screaming?
Yeah. Shaking on the floor, unable to have conversation for a full day with anybody, you're having to deal with this because I'm still working through all of this because I'm writing and people are calling me and I'm I can't because I can't even have a conversation. and my boyfriend kept telling me, I would tell him something and he's like, you literally just told me that. Like I would repeat myself, which is my biggest fear, by the way, to start repeating myself. If you have a dad with Alzheimer's, you do not ever want to repeat
You're
yourself.
like, I do not want this to come. I don't want to get this also. Do you have that fear?
Constantly. I changed my entire life when my dad got sick. I changed what I ate. I changed like my exercise routine. I changed my hobbies and my habits. Like I do crossword puzzles now. I do brain exercises. Like I think about that all of the time. I was vegetarian before I started eating fish because of the omega-3s that they think helps with with keeping your brain functioning. I mean, like I really, I was vegetarian for like 20 years and I changed everything. Yeah.
So who do you think holding this secret of your dad's illness has benefited, and who do you think it's harmed?
In some ways, I mean, I am a person who doesn't like to be super vulnerable to like forward facing. It's very, I have a lot of respect for people who do. I have a lot of respect that you're doing this because
thanks.
Because I do have a lot of trouble with vulnerability generally. So in some ways it has harmed me because I think, when I'm acting wild about something or losing my mind over something and people don't know why, that's probably very confusing. And when I'm open about it, someone always reaches out and it's like, I also have a grandparent or a parent or whatever with that. So I think the more open I am about it, the more it does actually help people and probably help people to understand the disease as a whole. Cause it's very confusing.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough to deal with and it's confusing to like, and what you should do and all of the things are very confusing. But I have the people I have talked to, like I've become that person. Like I've become this weird expert in hospitals, in Alzheimer's, in like medications. Like I can talk about that. Like I know a lot and have talked to a bunch of people through facilities, working with like various memory care facilities in Los Angeles. So, I mean, definitely being open has helped when I can be that expert.
Oh, I love that. And I love how you already told me how you're moving forward, like changing your diet, taking care of yourself, doing those crossword puzzles. But what would you tell someone else that has a parent that's going through this? What advice would you give them?
I mean, it's so different with everyone. I mean, the first advice someone gave me, and it was right, was to take over his finances, which I know is so specific, but, like they're going to forget to pay their bills. They're going to forget all of these things. Like they may be able to still live in the world and feed themselves and maybe take their pills and things like that. But the one thing that really goes is those things that like kind of the things we all want to ignore anyway.
Yeah. Who wants to pay their bills? Not I.
No one's clean the kitchen. That shit is going to go. Sorry. I didn't ask if I could cuss.
It's okay. You can totally cuss on my podcast.
And then I think like taking a breath and coming up with a long-term plan, because it is going to be long-term. Like maybe that long-term is a year or maybe it's 10 years and you don't really know until you like get a good doctor on board who can help with that long-term care and someone you trust. I found a really good doctor I love in Los Angeles. And yeah, I mean, it's just taking a breath and trying to deal with that. And then I guess sort of facing your own fears of mortality, because what happens is your parents get sick and then you're next.
Right. And we all die. We all die.
You all die and you start making wild decisions because you're like, well, maybe I should break up with everyone and move to a different, like you just start to lose your mind because you're just
like, maybe I should move to the middle of nowhere and not care about anything.
I definitely broke up with a boyfriend during all of this. I definitely like made some weird choices that were like, I think because I was like looking for stability where instead of like living the life that I knew I'd be happier with. And, yeah, I mean, I think like reflecting on how it's affecting you, go call your therapist, get a therapist, because you're going to definitely have days where you do weird things in reaction.
Okay, just give us before you go one of the weird things you did that you wish you didn't.
Oh God.
You should see her face. She's just like, ooh.
I mean, my like relationship wise, I was with someone who I didn't feel like was handling like the gravity of the situation very well. And I probably didn't give him a chance to handle it. And I sort of was like, I'm going to find someone who seems like more of an adult. And that was just the breaking up and the relationship were both mistakes.
Gotcha.
They were both not me. The person I ended up with was a person that I definitely shouldn't have ended up with, and was not a person. It was not for me at all. I think I just saw him as a stable person instead of a person I should be with.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I thought you were going to say you like dyed your hair a bad color or something like that.
Sure I did. I mean, I do occasionally like throw away basically everything in my house. I have just moments where I'm like, no, we are not living with this many papers in here. I don't care what they are. We're going to buy all this shit again. I don't know. Like I will throw away everything. If I had the money to start fresh every few months, I would probably just throw away everything in my house.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and being open about this and telling us your secret.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having this show.
And if you want to be on the show, please email me at secretlifepodcast@icloud.com. Until next time. Thanks again for listening to the show. Please subscribe, rate, share, or send me a note at secretlifepodcast.com. And if you'd like to check out my book, head over to secretlifenovel.com or Amazon to pick up a copy for yourself or someone you love. Thanks again. See you soon.